morality. Our sense of right and wrong is deeply influenced by culture. What we believe to be ethical is often shaped by traditions, customs, and values of the society we grow up in. But how does this influence play out in real life? Today, we explore how culture shapes our moral perspectives through real-life cases, ethical dilemmas, and thought-provoking discussions. Are moral values absolute, or are they flexible depending on cultural context?
Culture is the collective way of life shared by a group, encompassing their beliefs, customs, values, behaviors, and material creations. It serves as a framework for social interaction and identity formation. Culture includes material culture, physical objects that represent a society's way of life. Example, art, tools, clothing, and architecture. Non-material culture, abstract aspects of culture, such as traditions, language, ethics, norms, values, and social institutions. Culture is socially transmitted through learning communication and imitation, shaping individual and group identity. It evolves over time in response to historical, technological, and environmental changes. Culture's influence on morality. Culture plays a central role in shaping moral perceptions by influencing what is considered right or wrong. Key factors include: the first one is religion, provides ethical guidelines and moral principles. Example, Confucianism in China emphasizes respect and harmony. The second one, language, shapes thought processes and ethical discourse affecting how moral issues are understood and communicated.
Let's start with an important question. Is morality universal or does it depend on culture? Well, take the issue of arranged marriages in some cultures, such as in India and part of Middle East. Arranged marriages are seen as a tradition that strengthens family bonds and ensures compatibility. In Western societies, however, choosing one's partner is considered fundamental right.
Does that mean that arranged marriage are unethical? Well, it depends on perspective. If both parties consent and find happiness in the arrangement, can we really call it immoral? But if one person is forced into marriage, it becomes a human rights issue.
This raises an ethical question. Should cultural practices be respected, or should universal human rights take precedence? But who decides what is human right? For example, some people argue that the right to personal freedom should be absolute, while others believe cultural traditions deserve protection.
That's the core of cultural relativism. Moral beliefs are shaped by cultural context. What is acceptable in one society might be condemned in another. Yet, some actions like slavery or genocide are universally condemned, that suggests that some moral standards might be absolute.
Cultural relativism is the principle that values, beliefs, customs, and behaviors should be understood within their cultural context rather than judged by external or universal standards. It emphasizes that no culture is inherently superior to another, and all cultural norms must be analyzed based on the specific societal framework in which they exist. This contrasts with the ethnocentrism, which evaluates other cultures through the lens of one's own, often leading to perceptions that foreign customs are inferior, wrong, or backward. Cultural relativism promotes an objective and open-minded approach to understanding human behavior, allowing for greater appreciation of cultural diversity, while discouraging bias and prejudice. However, it also raises ethical concerns when cultural practices contradict universal human rights or moral principles.
Here is another example: capital punishment. In countries like the United States, China and Saudi Arabia, the death penalty is legal for severe crimes. But many European countries is considered inhumane and has been abolished. So, executing criminals, moral or not?
That depends on the cultural beliefs. Some societies prioritize justice and deterrence, believing that death penalty prevents further crime. Others focus on rehabilitation and human rights. What about cases where innocent people are executed? Some argue that risk of error makes the death penalty unethical. This highlights another dilemma. When two cultures have opposing moral belief, how do we determine which one is right?
The concept of cultural relativism was introduced by Franz Boas, a German-American anthropologist, as a response to ethnocentric biases in early anthropology. Boas and his students argued that each society must be studied on its own rather than compared to Western standards. This perspective fosters cultural understanding, tolerance, and respect, encouraging students or individuals to appreciate different ways of life without immediate judgment. Examples of cultural relativism. Cultural norms vary across societies, shaping everyday practices such as food traditions. Breakfast foods differ worldwide. For example, fish soup in some Asian cultures versus sugary cereals in the US. And second, public nudity. Some cultures accept nudity as natural, while others, for example, Islamic societies, emphasizes modesty and body covering.
Let's consider the hijab. In Islamic cultures, wearing hijab is often a sign of modesty and religious devotion. But in countries like France, laws have been introduced banning religious symbols, including hijabs, in the public institutions.
But isn't that a violation of religious freedom? Some argue that secularism should take priorities, ensuring that public spaces remain neutral. Others say it discriminates against Muslim women.
In places like Iran, some women are forced to wear the hijab, which raises another ethical issue. Should the government have the power to dictate personal choices? This brings us to another ethical question. Should cultural expression be limited for the sake of secularism, or should individuals have the right to practice their beliefs freely?
Let's talk about gender roles. In some cultures, women are expected to stay at home and to take care of children, while men are the breadwinners. In contrast, many Western societies encourage gender equality and share responsibilities.
But can we say one system is better than the other? What if women in traditional societies genuinely prepare these roles? That's the tricky part. Are these preferences freely made, or are they shaped by societal expectations?
This brings up a key question. When does culture become a force that empowers? And when does it become a tool for oppression?
Advantages of cultural relativism. The first one is encourages learning and social growth. Exposure to diverse perspectives enriches understanding and fosters personal and societal development. Second, eliminates cultural hierarchy. Prevents viewing any culture as superior or more advanced than another. The third one is promotes specialization. Societies thrive when people focus on their own cultural strengths rather than conforming to external standards. The last is fosters respect and harmony. Understanding different belief systems can reduce cultural conflicts and encourage peaceful coexistence.
Disadvantages of cultural relativism. First, moral ambiguity, the lack of universal ethical standards may lead to justifying harmful practices such as aggression or violence. Second, overestimate women's ethical judgment, assume individuals will always make morally sound decisions despite cultural conditioning. Third, encourages subjectivity, morality become entirely personal rather than a collective agreement on ethical standards. Fourth, either social classes, Some harmful traditions aid in gender discrimination, child marriage may persist if all cultural practices are deemed acceptable.
The Philippines, with its diverse ethno-linguistic groups, faces cultural tensions, particularly when indigenous traditions conflict with national laws and human rights. For example, ancestral land disputes, gender roles, or religious practices. Ethical theories provide different approaches to resolving these dilemmas. First, utilitarianism by Mill advocates for decisions that benefit the greatest number of people. Second, natural law by Aquinas emphasizes universal truth, human dignity, and moral order. Third, deontology by Kant focuses on moral duties and principles over cultural norms. And lastly, virtue ethics by Aristotle encourages individuals to cultivate moral virtues in decision making. Cultural relativism also extends to environmental perspectives where different societies hold varying attitudes toward nature, conservation, and resource management. Ethical frameworks help navigate these perspectives. First, utilitarianism evaluates environmental policies based on long-term consequences for society. Second, Kantian ethics opposes environmental destruction if it cannot be universally justified. Natural law stresses the harm caused to society when the environment is neglected. And lastly, virtue ethics encourages foresight, responsibility, and sustainability as moral values.
From these examples, we can see that culture plays a huge role in shaping our moral beliefs. And yet, some ethical principles like human dignity seem to be universal. So where do we draw the line between cultural respect and moral responsibility?
It's not easy. For example, child marriage is considered acceptable in some cultures but condemned by international human rights groups. Where do we step in? And when do we respect cultural traditions?
This is the challenge of ethical decision-making in a multicultural world. While culture influences morality, it is up to individuals and societies to engage in ethical reflection and choose what is truly just.
We have seen how deeply morality is influenced by culture. Culture shapes our understanding of right and wrong, teaching us values that become the foundation of our moral beliefs. At the same time, we recognize that some ethical principles such as justice, dignity, and human rights seem to transcend cultural differences.
This raises an important question. Can we ever find a universal moral code that respects cultural differences while upholding fundamental human values?
One thing is clear, navigating morality in a multicultural world requires open-mindedness, critical thinking, and a commitment to ethical reflection.
As philosopher Mahatma Gandhi once said, "A nation's culture resides in our hearts and in the soul of its people."
Perhaps the key is not to judge cultures as right or wrong, but to engage meaningful conversations that seek understanding rather than division.
Because in the end, morality is not just about what we inherit from culture, but about how we choose to act within it.
So as we move forward in this diverse and ever-changing world, the challenge remains. How do we balance cultural respect with the pursuit of universal justice?
Start with an important question.
In nations... Niche...
Yang kwan?